Animals have always been sources of fear and mystery.
Bill just got bitten by a wolf.
The werewolf is just pure id, and there's something of the savage beast attacking.
The primal, unrestrained, animalistic side of human nature. Obviously, sex is part of that.
It works completely as a horror movie in that it has many great scares in it, and it's moody.
She's ours.
But it's so clearly also having fun with the genre at the same time.
It's the only way to get rid of the damn things. They're worse than cockroaches.
Howling speaks for itself. It's a classic little movie.
I knew I shouldn't have left that broad back here.
I think it's a really good horror film with really good special effects.
Dan Blatt was a producer that I knew from New World Pictures, Roger Corman's company, and he had gotten involved in this project, The Howling, which was based on a book by Gary Brandner. And Dan had helped put it together at Avco Embassy. You know, they just wanted something they could sell, and they knew it was a high concept. There hadn't been a werewolf movie in a long time, so it was, you know, considered a very commercial idea.
Their niche was kind of making low-budget drive-in pictures. During the Howling period, they were sort of the House of Horrors. It was originally developed by another director, a guy named Jack Conrad, who gets a producer credit. And he had optioned the book and written a screenplay of his own that I guess he had managed to set up at Avco Embassy.
In Hollywood, we euphemistically call it creative differences with the director, and it wasn't working out. Dan and I talked about it and said, well, you know, Joe Dante would be great. I was really good friends with Joe. And so I called him up and I said, look, we have this werewolf movie, and I think we're gonna you know, make a change, you know, in the directing department, and would you be interested?
I had done 1.5 movies by this point, so I mean, it wasn't exactly you know, a great coup for them to get me. But on the other hand, I knew Bob Ramey, the guy who was running Avco Embassy at the time, because he had worked for Roger Corman as, in publicity. Since we knew each other, and I was extremely cheap, I was taken off of the movie that I was going to do, which was Jaws 3 People Zero at Universal, which looked like it was, for various reasons, about to fall apart. And I sort of went on to The Howling, and when confronted with the screenplay, I think that it became apparent that we needed to rewrite it.
So he said, well, if we can work on the script, you know, I'm in. So we hired a writer named Terrence Winkless. His adaptation was still fairly faithful to the book. And it really wasn't until John Sayles got involved that we pretty much just said, let's just throw out the book and do whatever we want.
I had previously worked with John Sayles on Piranha, which I think was his first screenplay.
The first draft was mostly based on the original novel, and then we decided to keep the basic premise of a modern-day werewolf and not use much of the rest of the novel. It just meant that I was kind of starting from scratch as far as the story was concerned, but not as far as the creature was concerned.
He would basically write most of the stuff on the plane from New York to LA. He was really fast. John was also working at the time on Alligator, and since both these pictures were really quite cheap, we would vie for who was going to pay to fly him out. Whenever you'd go to visit him, to, you know, to look at new pages and stuff, you'd knock on the door and say, who is it? You'd say who it was, and then you'd hear, you'd be taking the paper out of the typewriter and putting the other paper in because he was really working on the other guy's picture. At the time, he was really a find for low-budget movie producers because he was knowledgeable and he was smart, and he was a really good writer.
One of the things that I wanted to bring into, you know, The Howling was, you know, very often horror movies and science fiction movies have like a political bent. Well, I wanted to kind of do the same thing with psychology and this idea that, you know, the werewolf can be seen as a kind of metaphor for the id. You know, this is what the creature would do if we didn't put any brakes on him. I was a psych major, and so I had kind of, you know, had a look at various philosophies of helping people deal with psychological problems.
I didn't see him. I turned around, but I didn't see him.
There was a whole movement, starting in the late 60s, that would have you believe that the real problem always was repression.
Repression is the father of neurosis.
I was interested in having this kind of metaphor of these werewolves, of taking it the other way. Well, what if there was no repression? What if you just did whatever came to your mind?
Put her and her friend in a car, Pour gasoline over him, set fire to him, and push him off the coast road.
John's, real big contribution was the whole idea of doing this sort of satiric commentary on, at the time, self-help gurus and this guy that basically had this colony where all these werewolves were in therapy because they were obviously tortured by the fact that they were werewolves.
Well, the 70s were a time of getting in touch with your inner feel-good self, and there were a lot of movements coming on big.
I did it all. I did EST, TM, Scientology, Iridology, Primal Screamers.
There was, I thought, a lot of room for comment and parody on that kind of thing, as did John.
Screw all this channel your energy crap.
And the idea in The Howling of the Colony is basically a place where people with this social problem, which is that every once in a while they turn into werewolves or want to turn into werewolves, they find a way to cope.
There haven't been anywhere near as many werewolf movies as vampire movies, but it's the second most obviously popular horror character that isn't a fictional creation that's actually created from myth and lore.
By the time it came to do The Howling, there really hadn't been very many werewolf pictures. Werewolf movies were kind of considered old hat. It seemed like it would be more fun to try to take the myth into the 80s.
For a movie to take place today, it's ridiculous to think that people don't know what werewolves are or have never heard of werewolves. Of course they have, but from the movies. That's how we explain some of the rules of werewolves. We have it running on the TV.
Whoever is bitten by a werewolf and lives becomes a werewolf himself.
The guy who started the Wolfman stuff was a writer named Kurt Siodmak, who wrote the screenplay for the Wolfman in 1941. And he came up with a lot of lore about full moons and wolfbane and a whole bunch of stuff that became sort of accepted as the traditional stuff for werewolf movies.
How does it go? Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms. The autumn moon is bright.
You find if you look at some of the pictures that the lore changes based on what budget the people had to work with.
That's just a legend, though, isn't it? Yes, but like most legends, it must have some basis in fact.
The idea that if you get bitten by a werewolf, you become one yourself is the legitimate, quote-unquote, lore. Technically, I believe the way it works is that certain werewolves, like, alpha werewolves or whatever, can change at will. But if you're a victim, if you've been bitten by a werewolf, the full moon triggers it. Now, we got rid of that in The Howling because it didn't fit our purposes, because obviously the story would have had to have taken place over many months to have enough werewolf transformations. So we got rid of that by having Dick Miller, who is the expert in the movie, debunk that.
Hey, that's a lot of Hollywood baloney. Your classic werewolf can change shape anytime it wants, day or night, whenever it takes a notion to.
The rules that we went with is that, yes, if you are bitten by a werewolf, you will have this thing come over you. You will turn into a werewolf, but you can fight it. The other one was that you did need either to burn them or to kill them with something silver. That just a regular bullet was going to do some damage and knock them out, but they'd come back at you, and now they'd be annoyed because it hurt getting shot with that bullet.
Mostly the legends turn out to be psychological cases of people who had various problems, brain tumors and insanity and like that, and would do crazy things like, eat their kids and stuff. Well, when I was in college, I was the only kid who had a Roger Corman button. Everybody else had a Jean-Luc Godard button. So I was a fan, and I had grown up watching Roger's pictures all through high school and college. I was convinced that he was a great filmmaker. I got a chance to work for Roger doing trailers, and Alan Arkish and I were offered a chance to direct a picture that John Davison was going to produce if it was the cheapest movie that Roger had made up to that point. It was $60,000 in 10 days. Because we were actually shooting the movie in the daytime and then going back to the editing room and doing trailers at night, because it was the only way we could do both, because he said you can direct it, but you gotta still do your other job. And so we made this sort of cheesy little comedy.
Cut.
To everybody's surprise, it turned out, and it was like on film and had sprocket holes and stuff, and played in theaters. Not many, God knows, but some. And that eventually led to other things, and I got a chance to do this picture called Piranha.
Piranha, the deadliest man-eaters of all.
And made this sort of spoofy Jaws imitation. It wasn't spoofy because we thought ill of it. It was spoofy because we knew we couldn't afford to make the kind of movie that was going to really compete with a movie like Jaws. And so we kind of made a parody of 50s science fiction movies with piranhas in it.
They were unleashed into America's waterways to churn quiet streams into rivers of living death.
And that picture was pretty successful. So based on that, I got a lot of offers for giant turtle movies and Orca the Killer Whale and some other stuff, which I didn't do. Well, the casting director for this picture was Susan Arnold, who was the son of Jack Arnold, who had directed The Incredible Shrinking Man and Creature from the Black Lagoon. She brought in a lot of really interesting people. And Dee Wallace, of course, who I had seen in 10 and was the first real, quote, actress that I had ever worked with because she was very, very serious and very fragile.
I don't remember. And I think I was hired for the part because I am so vulnerable and most of the stuff is like that far underneath the surface, you know.
Bill, wake up, there's something out there. Outside, something was howling.
I really hadn't figured out quite yet how to be the character and then not be the character when they said cut. And so I sort of kind of was her for 6 weeks.
She lived as if this thing was really happening to her.
What's that gun?
God!
In the emotional scenes, and the scenes where she had to be frightened or emotional in any way, she really got into it.
I can't see him. I can't see him.
She had a particular aversion to violence, and I think that all of that added to her wonderful risibility in the role. She would get very genuinely upset and overwrought, and it was all very organic.
Dee really doesn't differentiate between a rubber appliance that's frightening and a real werewolf that might be in the room with her.
I felt like I really needed to believe what was happening. You have to screw around with your mind a lot, you know? You have to, and energy. It takes a huge amount of energy, at least the way I work, to cross that line where you're going, this is what I think I ought to do in this scene, and this is how I'm going to act it out. And go, okay, I'm just going to be there. This guy's really going to turn into a werewolf. And I'm going to believe it, and I'm going to live in the moment. And that's really going to happen. I know it sounds all dorky and weird and actory and dramatic and all that, but that's how I work.
It would take a lot of time to bring her down from some of the emotional peaks that she would reach in the scenes, and I had never obviously encountered that kind of thing before. It was great for me. There was no difficulty to directing her because she did take direction. The only difficulty for me was that once she would get to a place, sometimes it would be hard for her to get away from that place. Once she had reached that emotional peak, it wasn't like, okay, now we're going to do a comedy scene. She would really still be there.
Acting's personal in it. If we didn't want to open our hearts and show them to people, then we shouldn't be in this business.
This is Karen's husband.
Oh, you've got quite a brave young lady there, Mr. White. Neil, Bill Neal.
They couldn't find anybody to play my husband. And Chris and I were engaged at the time. I said, but, you know, I knew if I'd said, you ought to read my fiance, that was going to be the first thing that they were going to not do. So I said, you know, I know this actor. God, what's his name? Christopher Stone. He did absolutely fit what Dan Blatt was looking for. He went in and read, and he got the part on his own. And Dan called, I don't know, the next day, and I picked up the phone. He went, oh, Dee, I'm sorry. I was trying to get Christopher Stone. I guess I dialed the wrong number. And he said, no, you dialed the right number. And there was this long pause, and he went, oh, you're not telling me this. You're not telling me that you guys... I said, yeah, we're engaged. He said, oh, this is not good. This is not good. You will gang up on me on the set. I said, we will not gang up on you on the set, and just think all you have to do is rent one trailer.
Babe, you don't know what it's like.
I don't want to know.
I don't prepare a lot, and I don't like to rehearse a lot, and I don't like to know what I'm going to do before I do it. And Chris was absolutely the antithesis of that. He knew what he was going to do. He wanted to plan out what he was going to. So, you know, in that respect, it was a little weird because we worked different ways.
Are you wearing what I asked you to? Good.
Bob Picardo was another discovery of Susan Arnold's.
Just prior to this, I believe, he had been on Broadway playing Jack Lemmon's son in Tribute. He was the real thing. He was a legitimate. He was a stage actor. He was from New York, very well trained.
And he had one other major characteristic, which was he was willing to sit still for Rob Bottin to cover him with latex and all that other stuff that he does for hours and days on end.
I do remember one day being very glum, and I'm sitting in the hallway after my 6.5-hour makeup session, ready to shoot, looking very despondent, like, oh gosh, you know, trained at Yale, 2 leading roles on Broadway, my first movie in California, my face is melted off in a low-budget movie.
The audition scene that we did was the scene in the booth.
But you're different, Karen. I watch you on TV.
Bob came in and did this reading with Susan playing the character, and that so creeped her out.
I sat her in a chair, and I got behind her and would not let her turn her head and look at me, and I just came right over her shoulder.
I'm gonna light up your whole body, Karen.
It was immediate that this guy was, you know, great.
He was so convincing in the reading and so scary. And of course, he's a really great, funny guy, but, you know, we were just riveted by how powerful and creepy he was able to be as an actor.
If you're going to play a werewolf, you might as well celebrate that kind of elemental, animalistic freedom that it gives you.
You said on the phone that you wanted to get to know me. Well, here I am, Karen. Look at me.
I don't remember Robert. I only remember Eddie.
I think we better call the cops.
I had seen Belinda in Cannonball, which is a Paul Bartel movie.
That's how he got introduced to me. So then he brought me in on Piranha.
They're here, and they're hungry.
We did Piranha, and she was great and very, very tolerant of the stuff we put her through.
Well, the one thing I like about Joe is that he's very loyal, and he tends to use the same people in movie after movie.
Christopher, you're not gonna believe this.
So when it came time to do The Howling, there was this sort of second banana character who, of course, gets killed. Obviously, this was the girl. I mean, she gets killed in almost every picture she makes. She's perfect for this. Dennis Dugan had been Richie Brockelman, Private Eye, on what was supposed to be a spin-off series from the Rockford Files.
Look, I'm in a hurry here. This is an emergency.
And now he's a very successful comedy director.
Times have changed, and we haven't. Not enough.
Patrick Macnee really brought a lot as, you know, that kind of David Frost quality, you know, that he had as this very smooth media, you know, representative of the colony.
I play a civilized man in this, civilized? What am I saying? I play a psychiatrist. But anyway, one of those phony psychiatrists that are on television, and I take her up because I want to see her nude in a tub. A lot of nudity in this film, which is really great fun.
Marcia.
Oh, you're through, Doc. She's ours now.
Elizabeth Brooks was incredible. Once we put her in the makeup and the wig, Charles Adams would have died to have her play Morticia. I like character actors, and I also like to work with my friends. So by the time I had gotten to the point of doing The Howling, I had already worked with Kevin McCarthy, so I asked him to be in the picture.
Listen, get in touch with that Fujimoto, or whatever the hell her name is, and get her ready for the 11 o'clock report.
See, I like to put the writer in the movie if possible.
Quist is still with John Doe's. We haven't had time to refile him.
It's nice to have the writer on the set, and if you're on a location, chances are, you know, they're not going to want to fly him there. But if you hire him as an actor, you can sort of make a case for it.
There's old Stu, smiling up at me, leaking seawater out his ears.
When I hired James Murtaugh, I was not aware that he was the A1 steak sauce guy.
Raymond?
No, I try to stay away from meat.
Maybe later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
But he had that face. He had that kind of face of somebody that you'd like. He looked like your next door neighbor.
This is my wife, Donna.
John Carradine, I had tried to get for Piranha, but he wasn't available, and I always liked him, and we put him in the movie, and he was great to be around.
Let me go, I want to end it.
Well, John Carradine was an actor who said yes to a lot of movies when he should have said no. I think that his performance in The Graves of Wrath is one of the great American performances. I'd followed him because he'd also been in a lot of horror pictures and stuff. He played Dracula, and I'd always liked him. When he said yes to doing the movie, I was really thrilled and excited.
Took some persuading, didn't she?
As he approached the crew, he looked like one of these guys that lives in the bushes in Griffith Park, and I really thought, oh, a transit is coming. And then he walked up and I saw Joe greeting him, and I said, oh my goodness. Well, he was in character in a way, even when he was walking up the street.
Slim Pickens was in the movie because I had always liked him, and you had to like this guy. He was going to turn out to be a werewolf, so you wanted to make sure that people liked him. And he had been doing cameos like this in picture after picture after picture at the time.
What you ladies need is a good retriever.
Everybody knew who he was, even when they didn't know his name. We cast the movie off a draft that was not the one that we actually shot. And so John did know who a lot of these characters were going to be before he finished polishing them.
And so I wrote a bunch of dialogue that I felt like, well, if Slim Pickens said this, it would really work.
Hey, Doc said on the phone that you folks had a coyote problem out here. Hey, you're famous, ain't you?
And he accepted the role, and I guess he came and said, you know, boys, this dialogue fits me like a glove.
We get them all. Sun worshippers, moon worshippers, Satanists. The Manson people used to hang around here and shoplift.
The Howling got me a little pissed at first because he said, I got your day's work on the picture. I said, that's all there is? That's all there is? You don't fit in. You don't look like a werewolf. You don't look like, forget it. I said, all right, I'll take the day's work. And we got down there, and as it unfolded, it started to become my favorite part. And to this day, it is still my favorite part. With 150 pictures behind me, that is still a favorite part.
I got chicken blood, I got dog embryos, I got black candles, I got wolf bane. Look at this. Silver bullets. Some joker ordered them. 3006. Never picked them up. I take Bank America, American Express, Visa.
The name of the character that Dick plays in The Howling is Walter Paisley. Now, this was the name of a character he played in a picture called Bucket of Blood.
Walter Paisley is born.
Watching Roger's pictures when I was younger, he would appear. He was one of Roger's stock company.
Take me away to some cool blue place. Gas me.
I can't. I gotta go home.
I once got a letter from someone in England. They wanted me to do a part for them, and I said no. And they said, can we use the name? Like I had it copywritten. Can we use the name, Walter Paisley? So I figured, oh, I'll take a shot. I said, no, I forbid it. And they didn't use it.
When I did my first picture, the one thing that was important was writing a part for Dick Miller as a sleazy agent, which we did.
You don't take a job unless you check with your agent.
And he said, you play an agent, we'll call him Walter Paisley. I said, okay, fine.
You want an Amazon girl and a giant python. Hold on a sec.
Dick really just became and still is a good luck charm for Joe.
Crazy fuck.
Dick Miller is in all the movies that I do. I've only done one picture, one feature that Dick wasn't in, and it was because he got cut out.
Oh, boy.
Every time I read a script, it's like, you read the script and you try to figure out what you want to do with it or if you want to do it, and then and there's that other nagging question, where's the part for Dick Miller? Because if there isn't one, well, how can I do this? So, this rules out, movies about Pashtuns and, also just a lot of subject matter that I just can't face. The picture took about 28 days to shoot. Parker. Oh, pardon me. Any minute, wait. Don't stop. There you go, okay. There were some locations in Mendocino, beautiful locations, which we couldn't afford to stay in very long, so we shot the heck out of them. Anything that looks offbeat, it was shot in Mendocino. Anything that doesn't look offbeat was shot in Griffith Park. There's one scene where Belinda runs from Mendocino to Griffith Park to Cahuenga Boulevard, because that's where the stage was. We had a production designer named Bob Burns, who had been the production designer on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But he brought a certain queasiness to the props and stuff that we had. The idea of Marcia's cabin and the way she lived and, with dead animal skins and bones and stuff. I mean, Bob just ate that stuff up. A very talented guy, and just very outre and just really perfect for our needs.
Okay, guys, this is it. I'll keep the transmitter open.
When Dee walked into the porno shop, the unease and discomfort that you see was real. She literally couldn't look at anything. And it was a real porno store. We just went in and shot. I mean, the stuff was all real hardcore porn, and it's on the shelves, and it's not dwelt upon, so you really don't notice it. But she was like right up against them, and it was hard for her. she didn't like that.
That was a hard scene for me. It's a hard scene, first of all, just because of the place we were shooting it. And, you know, I'm from Kansas. I am.
We cheesed it up a little, maybe even cheesier with colored lights and pink lights and so forth. We just had to hide the things that you couldn't put in a movie. So lots of little pieces of tape and price tags on the appropriate parts.
We did need to project something in the booth when she went in there, and it obviously couldn't be real hardcore pornography. It had to be handled in a certain way. So we realized the best thing to do would be shoot it ourselves. Mike Finnell and I went into my garage and shot a 16mm fake porno movie. In fact, we shot two. There's one where she's in bed, and then there's one where she's on the top of a car. And it's not explicit, but it's fairly rough. And it was kind of uncomfortable doing it. It wasn't like a lot of fun. You'd think it would be, but it wasn't. It was kind of creepy. And then we, you know, scratched up the film and dragged it from the back of a truck and all that kind of thing and made it look like it'd been run through the porno booth 100 times. And it was pretty convincing. I mean, it looks pretty much like the kind of stuff you used to see.
Marker?
John Hora has a lighting style that sometimes looks like Japanese paintings. And he was very knowledgeable about, you know, Greg Toland and Stanley Cortez and styles and, you know, what we wanted.
What we mostly had to do was take a few lights back behind trees and backlight fog, so it sort of gave the presence of something. The poor prop guy had to run back and forth through every scene at the beginning with these fog machines laying it in. When we were shooting that, I was also figuring that when we got on the stage, we could easily imitate that same look, so that would give a continuity to all that.
Was our secret will be safe.
If you've got areas of shadow and you suggest what might be there, the audience, number one, their mind is active. They're actually participating because they're filling in. And secondly, they fill it in a way that's the most frightening to them. So it's better not to see.
If a movie's not really in color, it should be in black and white. If you don't use the color, then it's just there. And so we wanted this to be a color movie as opposed to a movie that was in color.
Just watch.
At the end of the movie, all the members of the colony are turning into werewolves. We thought that it would make sense that some of them, because they're turning into werewolves, they would have taken their clothes off, or their clothes would be ripped off, or whatever.
I walked into the barn and I looked up, and there were about 10 ladies with their boobs hanging out. And I went, okay, what the hell is this?
You make me sick.
I said, I'm not shooting this. The crew was laughing. Now, you know when the crew's laughing at 10 women with their boobs hanging out, you've gone over the line. I said, I'm not doing it. So they called Dan Blatt. Half an hour later, you hear his car coming through the farm, right? He goes and pulls up and goes, gets out, slams the door, walks in, looks up, and he goes, she's right, it's stupid. Put some clothes on him. Gets back out, gets in his car, and leaves.
Don't let him bite you. He'll turn into an asshole.
Joe's so tongue-in-cheek, you know. I mean, he's so sarcastic and so funny.
Switch, damn it, switch!
Doesn't that look good? You're in the looping stage, and Joe said,
You know, we got a kind of a dead spot right before you pull the thing out of your brain.
and I said, well, what do you want me to do? He says, well,
What would you say right before you pull something out of your, you pull a bullet out of your head? What would you say before?
and I go,
I want to give you a piece of my mind.
as a joke, expecting him to laugh. He goes,
Okay, do that.
which is how so many of Joe's classic moments come about. He goes,
all right, do it.
Joe's philosophy is they'll be more scared if you take them by surprise.
Get out of here.
If you make them laugh, and then all of a sudden something jumps out at you.
I didn't hear anything so funny anyway. Oh, Jesus.
You're caught off guard. You're going to be more scared. And also, if there isn't something to laugh at, in a movie as ridiculous as a werewolf movie, the audience is going to find something to laugh at.
Ginsberg's howl on the table and all of the visual jokes that he packed the frame with.
I find it interesting to comment on the movie within the movie. I mean, while you're watching it, so that you get the experience of watching the movie, but you also get sort of an editorial judgment on what the filmmakers think of the movie and the material.
La mujer,
Se cambió en un lobo. Hijo.
There was this thing called the smiley face at the time. Everywhere you went, there were these smiley faces. And it was just nauseating. And it seemed to me that this smiley face phenomenon needed to be put in its place. So we decided to use it as the emblem of the serial killer that we had in the movie. I mean, it was made to be an emblem for a serial killer.
Joe loves movies. He absolutely loves movies. I mean, you can't go to his house without him sitting you down and showing you a screening of something or another, usually a Michael Powell movie or something, you know, some oldie but goodie. He's just one of those people, you know. He spent most of his life watching television and storyboarding everything he could.
Joe is one of the first, movie brat directors who knows so many movies that it's effortless for him to refer to them in his work.
Larded throughout the movie, there are these references to other pictures that, if you do them wrong, kind of slow up the movie, because all of a sudden things are happening on the screen that half the audience is going, what's that mean? So the trick is to bury them within the picture so that they're only there for people who happen to be able to spot them, and if they don't, then the movie's still going on its own.
Almost every character in the movie is named after a director of a werewolf movie. George Wagner, with the Patrick McNee character. The head of the TV station, played by Kevin McCarthy, is Fred Francis, who is Freddie Francis.
Let's pause now for an editorial from our general manager, Fred W. Francis.
And Lou Landers is the anchorman.
The KDHB news team began working.
The John Carradine character is Earl Kenton, who directed an old werewolf movie. So, yeah, it was a real inside kind of thing.
The cameos by Joe's former employer.
Okay, mister, it's all yours.
Roger was legendarily parsimonious, and that was sort of a joke for all of us people who used to work for Roger, and he was good enough to go along with it, and that's fine. But it does stop the movie. People wonder, well, why is the shot hanging on this guy looking for change? He's not a character in the movie. So it's really, I don't encourage that kind of thing, but, when it was Roger, I couldn't help myself.
Please, you're going to purchase.
The editor of Famous Monsters of Filmland is in the movie, Forrest J. Ackerman, who's, of course, carrying his ubiquitous copy of his own magazine, which he tended to do.
One of the things that I liked the best was just the way Joe handled the satire at the local news station.
A Guyana-like spectacle.
That there is this very concerned public face about, we're doing a public service here, and this is our brave reporter putting her life on the line, at the same time that their eye is on the ratings.
Well, we're going to make ratings history tonight. You're going to be the cynosure of all eyes.
They really want it to be good television, no matter who gets killed.
Boy, she seems shaky.
Looks fine to me.
It is her job as a reporter to say, this thing is out there, it's a big danger.
But I have proof, and tonight I'm going to show you something.
But also there's the possibility that it's wasted. So that even something as big as, oh my God, they've discovered werewolves, and we just saw a woman turn into a werewolf on TV.
What is this?
Some of the reactions are, oh, that's a special effect, they're just fooling around.
Things they do with special effects these days.
But some of them are, yeah, so what's next? Entertain me again.
What are you kids watching?
The news lady's turned into a werewolf.
It just gets eaten up into the media. It's a big deal for 1 week, and then the next Monday, well, what are the numbers?
I saw pictures just like we saw in Israel. Humanity
is dead.
Pino Donaggio was an Italian composer, did not speak English. And the way that we scored that movie, because we had very little money, was that, and I've never done it this way since, thank God, but we flew him over from Italy, sat down at the Moviola and spotted the movies, and we had actually Paul Bartel, who's a director, a friend of ours, speak Spanish, and Pino speaks Spanish, and so they would speak Spanish at each other, which of course it's not their first language, so it was kind of a translation of a translation, but managed to get through it. And then Pino went back to Italy and recorded the score, and mailed it to us.
You took what you got from Pino, because that was all there was. However, he did luck into the use of this massive church organ that he had found, and he, I think, planned the whole score around this organ. And it's a terrific score.
The whole idea was we got to have a big transformation sequence in this movie, unlike anyone has ever seen before, which is actually see the physical transformation happen. That was one of the reasons for making the movie, as far as I was concerned.
We had told Afghan Embassy that we were going to do the first transformation scene with no cutaways, and it was going to all be done on camera. The general technique for doing transformations prior to this movie was lap dissolves, and they would change the makeup over a period of hours, and they would then dissolve all these pictures, all these things together in the editing, and that would turn him into a werewolf. However, he would have to stop moving. But in this case, the idea was to take the makeup and actually change it with air bladders and mechanics so that the stuff would actually happen on screen and there would be no opticals involved. The thing about Rob Bottin was that he was and is a genius, and he was really getting a chance to show off here. So I think he took it extremely seriously. And he's a perfectionist, which is a tough thing to be when you're in his profession because, there's time and there's money, and you only have so much of either one of them.
Rob would be working upstairs over the stage, is what we were doing the inserts, and we would just hear reports, well, it's coming along now, it's going to be ready in about an hour and a half, like a pizza.
One day, in fact, we actually didn't shoot any film because it was the first day that Rob was going to do the transformation. They went upstairs to the makeup room and didn't come down. Lunchtime came and went. Dinner time came and went. Haven't shot anything. No, it's not quite ready yet. Then he's finally ready. He comes down. He looks great, but unfortunately, everybody's got to go home because it's too late, and they're all on super golden overtime, even though it's a non-union movie. And we had to wait until the next day.
I'd heard rumors about this, what was new about this makeup, the sort of bladder effect, that they glued little airbags to your skin and then basically put a copy of your own skin, in other words, a latex mask that had been molded on your own face, over the little bags. Well, I didn't know that the bags would be condoms. New ones, but, condoms that had been glued here, and a giant, it was like a hot water bottle that was glued to my neck. Well, whenever they blew the tube that went into the bladder on my neck, it completely closed my throat and I couldn't breathe. So when they blew on that, my eyes would bug out and suddenly I would stop dead and my body would start to convulse because I couldn't breathe anymore. And we had a few laughs when my shoulder got overinflated and exploded on camera.
A little bladder goes a long way, we discovered. We were bladder but wiser when we were finished. At a certain point in the transformation, we realized that we aren't going to be able to use the actor anymore, but the face is going to become so unhuman that you got to go to puppet heads. So Rob sculpted a whole bunch of heads that have all sorts of mechanics in them to change from human to monster. The trick comes in, well, how do you shoot such a thing? It's always better to move the camera if possible, because that gives you a little more illusion of reality for something that isn't moving very much. But also there's frame rates.
The shot might start at 24 frames per second, which is normal speed, and as the action is progressing, we would maybe drop to 12 and speed it way up so it had an uncanny fastness about it, or as it drooled, we might go at a high speed, slow it down in slow motion, so the saliva would drool slower. It helped hide the fact that the rubber was what it was. And a lot of these things, we would go to the point they would break, because the rubber had a limit, but nobody knew where it was till you broke it.
Once we added sound to it, then things that were mistakes, where something that was supposed to go smoothly suddenly popped, or if you put a bone crack on it, it looked like it was on purpose. And in fact, it was better than having it just go smoothly. When it came time to do the werewolf transformations during the love scene, it was quite apparent that we weren't going to be able to afford to do that in any other way than animation, which suggests, a little more obviously than I would have liked, that they've actually turned into wolves. The transformation at the end for Dee was intended to not look like everybody else, because she, being a good person who has been resisting the whole thing, it didn't seem right to have her turn out to be a slavering, horrible creature like everybody else.
But I did feel from the character's point of view that she should be different than, a lot of the other werewolves.
Rob came up with a kind of, it almost looks like a Pekingese, kind of a werewolf. That was shot the day before the picture was printed, the day before the prints were made, in our office on El Centro. And it was like done at the last minute, and it was just put up against the wall and shot in a huge close-up. And that whole scene is done in huge close-ups because of the fact that there was no set.
The design of the werewolves in this movie was lifted directly out of the research that we did. There were old woodcuts. They were, like 16th century woodcuts that showed this wolf-like creature with a long snout and the big ears, but standing on its hind legs. So it kind of walked like a man, yet it had the backwards legs, and so it couldn't possibly be a man.
You know, people are shaped a certain way, and wolves are not. Wolves have extremely skinny waists and these big haunches. So ultimately, we just ended up going with a real idea of what a huge wolf would look like if he was standing upright and, you know, could look you in the eye.
You know, when we actually shot The Howling, the werewolves were not finished. So we didn't even really know what it was going to look like, how big it was.
Rob Bottin didn't have a lot of money to build all the werewolf stuff. So basically what he built is he built hands, and he built werewolf heads, and they look great, but they only went to here. And so that whole scene where she's killed by the werewolf was done rather perfunctorily originally, with these werewolf heads and hands. And it proved to be somewhat limiting. And we had to go back to Embassy and say, listen, if you give us a couple of more bucks, we can probably do better than this.
And we came back 3 months later to do all the interaction with the werewolf after it was finished.
We actually were able to afford to build a suit, which was sometimes worn by an actor, and other times would be just the legs. Although you never actually see the whole thing full length, you get the impression that this is an actual wolf with a you know, very thin waist and these big legs. In our grandiose dreams, we also had decided that we wanted to have some stop-motion werewolves, since we knew that we couldn't build a suit that you could actually look at. So Dave Allen, who we had known for a long time, was a stop-motion guy, who was one of the best in his field, designed us some werewolves that would be seen in the barn, and that the werewolves would, you know, you'd see them struggling and burning up in the barn. So we built a little barn set, and shot some werewolf stuff, and we looked at it and it looked pretty cool. But when we cut it into the movie, it didn't look like the rest of the picture. And the movements were different, the lighting was a little different. We kept showing the rough cut to people, and they go, what movie did that stuff come from? You know, where'd you get that footage? And it just wasn't working in the movie, and it was breaking everybody's heart, but we just knew that we couldn't use it. But we did use a little piece of one shot of the werewolves baying at the moon at the very end, but even then we had to put it in the middle of a dissolve. In the script, it said that when the wolves were running through the woods, that they could actually fly. Rob came up with this concept which we used to call the rocket wolves. And the rocket wolves were fiberglass werewolves, which were finely detailed and looked terrific.
Up its rear end, it had a tube, and it went onto this big air mortar thing. It shot through the air. And the only problem was, which you couldn't see when you were shooting it, is that it left a contrail coming out of its rear end. So on film, it looks like it's jet propelled literally out of its ass, you know, and we weren't able to use it.
It was really a process of discovery for all of us.
The Howling.
It was surprisingly successful, and I think it was largely because the campaign was really, really good. The ad campaign was a claw ripping through a screen or something, and then behind it is a woman screaming.
It was subtle. It wasn't screaming werewolf. We thought it was great because it was suggestive without being blatant. We didn't want to give away what the werewolves looked like.
We sort of decided to make the picture look like it was an urban crime movie for the first part, and in fact got the distributor, Avco Embassy, to sort of soft pedal the werewolf stuff in the advertising to make it look more like a slasher movie, which were actually pretty popular at the time.
Somewhere in this city, in this human jungle, it begins.
What you try to do in advertising is very quickly, you know, say, okay, this is the kind of movie this is. Now, from the ad campaign, you wouldn't really know that it was also funny.
Part of the fun was that people really didn't know it was a werewolf movie for the first couple of weeks when it came out, and it was a surprise. It's a hit. It certainly surprised me.
I think it's way, way above what you call a horror film. And of course, Bottin's work is something quite extraordinary. I never want to see the film again, because the first time was so extraordinarily exciting. I haven't had anything like it in the cinema for a long time.
I sat there in shock at the audience that went like a roller coaster, laughing, screaming, all the way through the entire movie. And I was in shock. I had never witnessed an audience interaction like that.
I thought it was really good. I thought it really worked.
It really is a movie that kind of passes reviews because it's a kind of a genre movie, and it's going to play in places where people don't necessarily check the reviews. They just say, okay, what's playing next? Werewolf movie, yes or no?
Steven Spielberg apparently saw it and got Dee Wallace for E.T. from it. And ultimately, I think it probably led to me directing Gremlins because I was sent that script in the mail, just like it came in the mail. I thought it come from the wrong person. I said, well, Steven Spielberg sending me mail? What for? The Howling did well enough to spawn a sequel, although if for whatever reason it wasn't made by Embassy. They went to Europe and made Howling 2, Your Sister is a Werewolf. Then there was Howling 3, which was the marsupials, which was the weir kangaroos, or whatever they were. And then there was Howling 4, then there's Howling 5, 6, 7. I don't know. There's one with freaks in it, and there's one with a circus, and I can't tell you. Everything is so different now. I mean, not only the politics of the movie business, but the economics of the movie business are such that the only way to justify making this picture is to do it incredibly cheaply or very expensively. I would guess if you were going to make this picture today, you would be doing CGI effects up the wazoo, and you would be having as many werewolves as you could possibly fit on the screen at any one time, and they would be doing awful things to everybody, constantly.
The methods of filming it would be different. There's different technologies involved. You don't have to strive for that mechanical thing that they did in those days. That was done well.
You can basically have the creature do anything you've written. You can have them stand up, walk, and do all that. But there's not so much to imagine anymore because you're showing everything.
One of the things that's happened with digital technology is that people take it for granted. They're pretty hard to astonish these days. So just those simple transformations wouldn't be any big deal.
A secret society exists and is living among all of us.
You know, people stop me all over the world about The Howling. It has a huge following.
It was a modern movie in 1980, and it's a relic. It's 20 years old. Time has been kind to it, I think, but you know, it is what it is. There's a certain quaintness now to The Howling, which was exactly what we were trying to avoid when we made it, but it comes to all of us. You make a lot of movies, if you're lucky, and they're all your kids, that's what they say, and you even love the ugly ones, which you do. But this one is one of the rare cases where everything sort of fit together and came out right.